Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder. What does that mean to you? Let me say it again. Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder. It sounds pretty high-tech, fancy, uh, serious. And I wonder why they're not just using the term sexual addiction. Who knows? Hey, I'm Ken Donaldson, back again for another episode of Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece. And today we're going to take a look at specifically compulsive sexual behavior disorder, sort of kind of versus the old language or the language that so many of us use called addiction, and why that is. Why is there such a difference, and why are we being so particular with our languaging here? I'd like to start by introducing you to a book. You may have seen this if you work in the field, and if you are not working in the field, then you've probably never seen it. We call it the DSM, and this happens to be the DSM-5. It's the fifth edition, and it stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it has all of the diagnoses, the proper formal diagnoses that we would use in the field of psychotherapy, addictionology, sex therapy. It's the same diagnoses that psychologists would use and psychiatrists would use. And this is for the US. Now, it gets a little bit different when you cross the borders, as we're going to find out. There's a section that's called, on page 481 to be exact, substance-related and addictive disorders, addictive disorders. And I want to just read something here. In addition to substance-related disorders, this chapter also includes gambling disorder, reflected evidence that gambling behaviors activate reward systems similar to those activated by drugs of abuse and produce some behavioral symptoms that appear comparable to those produced by the substance use disorders. Other excessive behavioral patterns, such as internet gaming, have also been described, but the research on these and other behavioral syndromes is less clear. Thus, groups of repetitive behavior, what some term behavioral addiction, such as subcategories as sex addiction, exercise addiction, or shopping addiction, are not included because at this time there is insufficient peer-reviewed evidence to establish the diagnostic criteria and course descriptions needed to identify these behaviors as mental disorders. There'll be no tests on that, so you don't have to memorize it. Don't worry about it. So that's what the DSM-5, which is published by the American Psychiatric Association, just so you know. That's the psychiatrists that are medical doctors. They have a few psychologists and mental health counselors and social workers on the board, but pretty much that's driven by psychiatrists who are taught the medical model, if you will, of therapy. Now, let's compare that for just a moment here to the ICD-10. The ICD-11, that's the International Classification of Diseases that's published by the World Health Organization. And in this most recent edition, the 11th edition, they have come up with a compulsive sexual behavior disorder. Okay, and here's the characteristics of it. It is characterized by a persistent pattern of failure to control intense, repetitive sexual impulses or urges, resulting in repetitive sexual behavior over an extended period, which is considered 6 months or longer, that causes marked distress or impairment in personal, family, social, educational, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. The pattern is manifested by one or more of the following. One, engaging in repetitive sexual activities has become a central focus of the person's life to the point of neglecting health and personal care or other interests, activities, and responsibilities. Two, the person has made numerous unsuccessful efforts to control or significantly reduce repetitive sexual behavior. Three, the person continues to engage in repetitive sexual behavior despite adverse consequences. Four, oh, adverse consequences mean like they give some examples: repeated relationship disruption, occupational consequences, negative impact on health. Four, the person continues to engage in repetitive sexual behavior even when he or she derives little or no satisfaction from it. So those make pretty good sense as far as a general explanation of what would describe what they've decided to call compulsive sexual behavior disorder, CSBD. I guess that would be the acronym. Now, going back to the American Psychiatric Association, I went to their website, and this is, I actually printed it right from their website. And this is about substance use disorder. Now, they don't use the term addiction, they call it substance use disorder. So here are the four main criteria that people have to meet in order to be to meet the criteria for an official diagnosis of a substance use disorder. Impaired control, a craving or strong urge to use the substance, desire or failed attempts to cut down or control substance use. Social problems. Substance use causes failure to complete major tasks at work, school, or home. Social, work, or leisure activities are given up or cut back because of substance use. Risky use. Substances used in risky settings continue despite known problems and the actual effects. There's a tolerance, which means there's larger amounts needed for the same effect, and withdrawal symptoms, which is different for every substance. So it's a much tighter definition, but it sounds fairly similar to what they are describing there from the ICD. I also printed out, again, from the American Psychiatric Association. They do have one I would call behavioral addiction in the DSM-5, but they call it gambling disorder. They don't call it gambling addiction. They used to call it pathological gambling. So they've changed the label, the diagnosis a few times. Here's the criteria. One, need to gamble with increasing amount of money to achieve the desired excitement. Two, restless or irritable when trying to cut down or stop gambling. Three, repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back on or stop gambling. Four, frequent thoughts about gambling, such as reliving past gambling experiences, planning the next gambling venture, thinking of ways to get money to gamble. Five, often gambling when feeling distressed. Six, after losing money gambling, often returning to get even, referred to as chasing one's losses. Seven, lying to conceal gambling activity. Eight, jeopardizing or losing a significant relationship, job, or educational career opportunity because of gambling. And nine, relying on others to help with money problems caused by gambling. Now, a little bit more specific than the substance use disorder, but it really does fall a lot in line with what I read to you earlier, the compulsive sexual behavior disorders. So what is all this to do about apparently it's got something to do with the word addiction. Now, I am going to take some ownership here. I might be coming from a biased place because my background, my career started in the world of addiction. My first a set of credentials. I was a board certified addiction professional in the state of Florida. I now have a national certification and an international certification. So I have a lot of background in that. And so I will own that I may be tainted. I may have biases, but there are a lot of addiction treatment programs. And we use the word addiction rather freely and openly. So it's curious that there seems to be this movement away from it. And part of it, what I'm understanding, and I found this on the let's see here. This is from the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA. This is interesting. So this is actually a government site. Some of your hard-earned tax dollars are going to create these things. They're referring to some new languaging. In fact, the title of this is Preferred Language for Talking About Addiction. Okay, so actually they want you to not call it addiction, but they have to call it addiction in order to get your attention. You see where it gets a little confusing? So, and what their rationale is that there's a stigma with the word addiction, and there may be, there could very well be. I sort of have lived in this world for many, many years. So again, I may be biased about it, but here's what they're suggesting. Here's what they are suggesting we refer to a person as versus how we used to refer to people. For example, they're suggesting that we say a person with a substance use disorder. Now, substance use disorder, how many everyday regular people are going to know, even have any idea what that means, or use that language? The SUD, we call it. The substance use disorder. Who uses that language? Not very many people. Or a person who misuses alcohol, engages in unhealthy, hazardous alcohol use. Whew, that's a mouthful. So much I tripped over my tongue. Or person in recovery, or long-term recovery, or person who previously used drugs. Okay, those all sound nothing wrong with them, nothing bad. They're a little cumbersome. Versus they're saying no longer use the word addict, no longer use the word alcoholic. Now, I actually support that to a point. I don't think labeling somebody as an addict or an alcoholic is helpful. Okay, I don't like the whole labeling thing. That part I get. But saying that the person is struggling with an addiction versus saying the person with a substance use disorder or whatever the behavior or substance is, that's the part that just seems a little bit off center. So it's curious that we're having these conversations about what to call this. And I have to tell you, there's books, many pieces of research that grow into great detail. I mean, legitimate, valid, reliable research that goes into great detail as to why it should be called one thing and not another. And my question is, okay, I think they all have valid points. Everybody does. But in the meantime, while we're spending all this time and energy arguing over what to call it, why couldn't we just be spending this time and energy developing treatment protocols to help people? Or better yet, you ready? Sit down. This is the big one. This is the big one. Put the time and energy into creating prevention programs, early intervention programs. We know the early signs and symptoms of somebody who's going to later on have a higher likelihood of getting caught up into some kind of addiction. We know the signs and symptoms. We know the kind of families, the kind of neighborhoods, the situations they come out of, that those people have a higher likelihood. Why don't we put time and energy into prevention programs, early intervention programs, instead of all this time and energy just trying to essentially change the semantics? I know you don't have an answer for that. I'm going to try to find an answer for that. Okay. So tune back in for the next episode of Sex, Addiction, and the Missing Piece. And please feel free to leave a comment. And if you'd like to leave a review and subscribe for it, that'd be even better yet. Ken Donaldson, I will look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.